Module 7 is hereby presented and it is discussing estimation. Please subscribe and share. Don't forget to press the bell shaped button so that you can receive subsequent presentation. Thank you.
About a population based on an estimation, because we are starting from a sample and we are trying to generalize about a population. So because the sample population is not equal to the entire population, we then have to account for sampling errors, and those sample errors will arise because the sample estimate is not equal to the population estimate, and this is due largely to sampling errors. The sampling errors will be discussed below. Then secondly, the likelihood of occurrences of the estimate, which is probability. So there are two things that have to be accounted for. The fact that sample estimate is not equal to population estimate due to sampling errors, which is largely as a result of coincidence of random sampling. Then the second factor is the likelihood of occurrence of this estimate per sampling. If you carry out many samples, you will see that it has likelihood of occurrences, and that probability can be determined. Now, sampling error. These errors are due to possible coincidence or coincidences of random sampling. Now, what I mean by coincidence of random, let me just briefly explain. You could take your sample by any method and still arrive at something that is not representative of the population. It is possible by coincidence. For example, you want to take a sample of a class. It is possible to use random sampling or systematic sampling and end up selecting short people in the class. It is very possible by coincidence. Assuming you want to measure the height, you want to find the average height of the students in that class. So since x bar is not equal to the population mu or the population mean, then mu, which is the population mean, is equal to x bar plus sampling error, as I've explained. Because mu is the entire population mean and x bar is the sample mean, then something is missing. Before you can equate the sample mean to the population mean, then you must account for the sampling error, and that's why we are doing this. The formula for the sampling error is standard score z times s over square root of n. S means standard deviation and n is the sample size. Then z is the standard score. So now that is a sampling error. So mu will now equal to x bar plus z times s over square root of n, because in the above z times s over square root of n is the formula for the sampling error as described. So mu, which is a range which is the confidence interval, I will explain confidence interval as we go by, which is the confidence interval range for mu, is equal to x bar plus z, which is standard score, plus standard deviation over square root of number of sample. Then let's go to standard error. These are errors likely to be met as you try to adjust for probability and sampling errors. Standard error the standard error shows how different x bar is from mu. From all the samples, if you take many samples, then the standard error of the mean is calculated from this as SEM, which is standard error of the mean, to be equal to standard deviation over square root of n. So in other words, if you are trying to calculate the mu, it should be x bar plus bracket standard score times standard deviation of the mean, which is s over square root of n. If you would like to read more, you can explore the link that is provided. Then confidence interval. Confidence interval is the range of likely values for mu based on sample data. That is, if you take so many samples, you are likely to, using different methods anyway, or even the same method sometimes, but particularly if you use different methods, you get series of samples with different means, with different population mean or different S bar. So how different the S bar is from the real mu is what is called standard error. And if you get so many differences, you can now integrate it into a calculation to determine the standard error of the mean, and that is x over square root of n. You can go to the link as I said. Then C, confidence interval is the range of likely values for mu based on sample data. Also, if you take so many samples, you will get a range of likely values for mu. It should now this confidence interval consists of the confidence level, a statistic, and a margin of error. Now let me take that again. The confidence interval is a range of likely values for mu. That is, if you have sample data, you taking different samples, then you find a range of likely values for mu, population mean values, and it should be the precision. It actually shows the precision of the sample method, because if the sample means you get are all the same, it means the sampling method is perfect. But because you cannot get the perfect sampling method, they are bound to vary. But if the standard deviation of the variation is so little, then it shows that your sampling method is good. If there are wide differences in the standard deviation, if the standard deviation is very large, then your sampling method is not perfect. It's not so good. You can improve upon it. You can do it all over again and ensure that it is well done. So it shows the precision of the sampling method. So, and I also said that the sampling interval consists of the sampling, the confidence interval consists of the confidence level, a statistics, and margin of error. For example, let me give an example here. With a 90% confidence level for mu, if you have a 90% confidence level for mu, what are you saying? You are saying that you can be 95% confident that interval contains mu. Whatever interval or the likely range of values that you get contains the real mu. If you generate 95% confidence intervals from many data sets, you can expect the confidence interval to include the true population mean in 95% of the cases. So in 95% of the cases, if you take a confidence level of 95%, you are saying that in 95% of the cases, there is every likelihood that the true mean will be in the series of confidence intervals that you are likely to arrive at. That's what it means. So please, you can go to the link at Wikipedia to freshen yourself about this. It is not difficult at all. confidence level. I will try to explain confidence level by using an example which I used before in the previous slide. If you say you take a confidence level of 95% for male, it means you are 95% confident that the interval contains the male. That is, that the confidence interval will contain the male. You are 95%. So it's a probability statement you are making, that you are 95% confident that the confidence interval will contain the male. So if you generate 95% confidence intervals from many data sets, if your confidence interval is based on 95% confidence level for many data sets, you can expect that your confidence interval will include the true population male in 95% of the cases. That's exactly what you are saying. So when you take a 95% confidence level, that is the statement you are making, because confidence level is the probability part of the confidence interval, and there's a relationship between the two, which I have just explained by using an example. Confidence interval also describes how strong we believe that a particular sampling method will produce a confidence interval, that includes the true population parameter. So how strongly we believe. So if you take 90%, we believe less strongly than if you take 95%. So this is a probability statement which you often make in research statistics. So a 95% confidence intervals means that 95% of the intervals contain the true population parameter. That's another statement which is the same, which is similar with the first statement you made, but it's made in another form. Then margin of error. In a confidence interval, the range of values above and below the sample statistic is called the margin of error. So if you take a sample statistic, for example, X bar, if you get an X bar figure of 8, and if you have figures that are above the range of values that are above 8 and range of values that are below 8, the range of the values above and below the sample statistic is called the margin of error. So you have 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe to 15. Maybe that is the end of that is the final range of the values for the samples. Then maybe 7, 6, 5, 4. Maybe that's the lower range. So 7, 6, 5, 4 will be the lower range. 9 to 15 will be the upper range. So this together is called the margin of error. Standard normal distribution, a probability density distribution that occurs when a normal random sample has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation as 1. So you can see how it's written there, Z into N into 0 plus 1. So normal random variable means a variable that is selected through randomization. Then the normal random variable of a standard normal distribution is called a z-score. That's where the idea of z-score came into statistics, into research statistics. This is an explanation. The normal random variable, which is expressed in the form of standard normal distribution, is called a z-score. When you go to the field and you get your figures, it is rarely possible that your figures will exhibit a standard normal distribution curve, because that is an ideal. Usually it may not be even normally distributed, or it could normally distributed but not standard, to the extent that the mean will be 0 and the standard deviation will be 1. So this is a probability distribution curve which normalizes it and sort of calibrates it into probability, and you standardize it. That's why it's not just a normal distribution, but a standard or standardized normal distribution from where probabilities can be taken, from where you can read probability of occurrences of the random variables. Every normal random variable can be transformed to a z-score. So you can transform using this standard normal distribution curve, and you can see the formula for that. Z is equal to x bar minus mu over standard deviation, where x is the normal random variable, mu is the mean of x, and that's the number of random variables which you express in the form of mean, and standard deviation is also shown there of x. Field data often has non-normal distribution, so they are transformed to a z-score. So it's actually the z-score distribution table is to transform field data, using probability. I hope this is clear. This slide discusses further the properties of the standard normal distribution curve. As I said before, this is hardly obtained from the field, but we set an ideal from where probabilities can be read using the z-score. So you can see, if you look through, you see all the properties are explained, but the one that is striking there is that the data sets are evenly distributed, as far as are assumed to be evenly distributed for standard normal distribution, such that mean is equal to median and median is equal to mode. So where mean is 0 at the center, median is also 0 and mode is also 0. So you can see it on your right hand side, the symmetrical distribution, which is representative of the standard normal distribution, and up there too is the histogram, and you can read from the histogram, you can see how the data sets are distributed, and you can see the plot, the plot diagram, the scatter diagram, and it shows centrality, showing that the data sets are evenly distributed. So the other scenarios are usually the ones obtained from the field. They are either right skewed or left skewed, or what you can call positive skewed or negative skewed. You can see that the mode is different from the median, and the median is different from the mode. They all have their differences, and their values are not the same for both the positive and negative skew. It's only the symmetrical distribution that converges at the center with the identical mode, median, and mean. So this is very useful for probability sake, so that the random variable can be expressed in the form of probability based on the standard normal distribution curve. Level of significance. Alpha, written ALPHA, is the size of type 1 error. Now you ask me, what is type 1 error? What is type 2 error? Let me briefly explain. Type 1 error is rejecting a true null hypothesis. When you reject a true null hypothesis, you are said to have committed type 1 error. The probability of committing type 1 error, or better still, the probability of rejecting a true null hypothesis is is type 1 error, or the risk of rejecting a true null hypothesis is type 1 error. It is known as the level of significance of a test or tail area probability. Now, beta, alpha and beta, beta is the probability of committing type 2 error. What is type 2 error? Accepting a false null hypothesis is type 2 error. Which error do you want to commit out of the two? Well, none, really. Ideally, you don't want to commit any errors, but you cannot operate without committing errors. So most researchers choose to commit very minute amount of type 1 error. That is, rejecting a true null hypothesis. Since you cannot operate without errors, you choose to commit the least. Now, beta is the probability of committing type 2 error, as I said. Ideally, since you do not want to commit any error, alpha should be equal to beta. But, as I said, you cannot avoid errors. And since you are even into sampling, you are bound to commit sampling errors. And you initially started with measurement errors. So there is no way you can run away from errors in research. The practical objective is to minimize alpha and beta. That's errors type 1 and type 2, and keep them very, very small and ineffective. That's all you can do. That's all that's within your powers. So now if you look at these two errors, you see that you can be culpable if you don't calibrate them very well. As I told you, ideally, alpha is supposed to be equal to beta, but it's not often so, because these errors are unavoidable. But let's move on. The value of 1 minus beta measures the probability of rejecting a true null hypothesis. Now, this is the objective of testing the hypothesis. What it actually means is that alpha, instead of being equal to beta, is equal to 1 minus beta. So what does it mean? What does that mean? Alpha is inversely proportional to beta. Or no, beta is inversely proportional to alpha. So the smaller the value of beta, the greater is 1 minus beta. 1 minus beta is known as the power of the test. So the statistical power is measured as 1 minus beta. If you have alpha as 1 minus beta, if the value of alpha increases, beta must decrease. So the more type 1 error you make, the less the type 2 error, and vice versa. So the idea is to try to balance them and see which errors would you prefer. Is it type 1 and type 2 or type 2? Most researchers prefer the type 1 error. So as changes in the size of alpha and beta work inversely as a trade-off, as I've explained, if alpha is reduced, beta will increase. So generally, because researchers prefer to commit a minute size of type 1 error, they normally take it at 5%. So that the power of the test will also be enhanced. 5% is small. For art sciences, I think they take 1%, but for social sciences, the maximum of 5% they take. Art sciences, you need more precision there. Here is based on human factors, and you can allow some margin of errors, more margin of errors than in the art sciences. So the power of the test will be enhanced if you take 5%. It will be more enhanced if you take 1%. That's for the hard sciences. But for social sciences, 5% is normally taken. And that's why they take 5%, because that still keeps the power of the test at perfect level for social science projects. So 5% is taken usually. So alpha measures the size of type 1 error, which is preventing you from rejecting a true null hypothesis, and beta is the probability of committing type 2 error, which is accepting a false null hypothesis. Usually researchers choose the alpha route, and that's how they've been doing their research, because it enhances the power of the test. So in this research studies, we'll be using 5%, alpha level at 5%, or level of significance for most of our examples. Now, before I go on to descriptive and inferential analysis, I'd like to make reference to the last slide as regards the level of significance. If we take a level of significance at 5%, as most researchers do, what you are saying in effect is that your confidence level is 95%. So if your confidence level is 95%, I explained confidence level in the last slide, and then your level of significance will be 5%. I mean, in the same manner, if your confidence level, you take it at 90%, if your confidence level is 90%, it means your significance level is 10%. That's what it means. Because if you are confident to 95%, then you are not sure for only 5%. That's what it means. So now, descriptive and inferential analysis. Descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis. Descriptive analysis summarizes data and indicates what the data seems to be saying. Actually, descriptive is not the final analysis. If you've been following my explanation in some modules past, you will see that they only tell you what the data seems to be saying, not what the data is actually saying. So, but it's okay, it gives a lead too, but sometimes the lead is not corroborated by the inferential analysis, but at least it gives a lead. The data seems to be saying something, but you have to subject it to probability and allow for the errors mentioned in the past to be able to come out with an outcome that is valid, or that can be acceptable to the research community. So descriptive analysis is majorly about data summary, which can be done graphically or in a tabular form or in tabular form. For the tabular form, you have frequency table, crosstab, measures of central tendencies, you have mean, mode, median, variability and spread, you have range, interquartile range, variance, standard deviation, coefficient of variation, and for position you have ogive, you have quartiles, you have percentiles, standards, and z-scores, and so on. Then for the graphical, you have line graph, pie and bar chart, histogram, pictogram, frequency polygon. And for the measures of position, you have box plots, stem and leaf, and so on and so forth. You can read further using the link. For inferential analysis, inferential statistics is often predictive. It presumes the testing of the properties of a population by using the test of hypothesis. This will form the basis of our next module, which subject descriptive findings to test of sample estimate infused with estimation principles. So what that means is that inferential statistics is about hypothesis testing, because it tests sample estimates and infuses it with estimation principles, which takes account of the errors, the error types, and takes account of all probabilities, sampling errors, and so on. So it comes out with more robustness, and tends to do justice to the external validity of the study, because external validity really is about taking charge of the estimation, because external validity means that you can generalize from using sample, beginning with use of sample. You can generalize on the events that affect an entire population coming from sampling, from the samples you have taken. And also inferential analysis or inferential statistics gives assurance about confidence, because you take account of confidence level, confidence intervals, and stuff like that, and even significant levels, which we just discussed in the last slide. So it's more robust, and all students are advised to go up to inferential statistics, except it is otherwise impossible. For most of the researches, it is quite possible to go to differential statistics, because then you are able to have taken all the probabilities into consideration, and your outcome will tend to be more valid and acceptable to the research community. So I advise all students not to stop at descriptive statistics, because descriptive statistics tells you what the data seem to be saying, and it does not take account of sampling errors and even some measurement errors too. Coincidence of random sampling, and some other errors that are inherent therein. So it is when you do an inferential statistics that you are able to stand out and make valid conclusions about issues which you have carried out in your research. In addition to the points I have raised before in the last slide concerning the superiority of the statistical inferences over descriptive analysis, I wish to emphasize again that because statistical inferences are based on generalization from a sample, which we call estimation, but the sample errors which may arise from measurement will include coincidence of random sampling, when the researcher randomly selects some representative subjects. I have explained this before, coincidence of random sampling. Then there can be varied statistics obtained when repeated samples from the same population are taken, and that is called random variability. Therefore, reliability of research findings on the basis of descriptive statistical analysis is often inconclusive, because normally it tells us what the data seems to be saying, not what the data is saying. So to ensure outcome reliability, sampling errors must be accounted for. The researcher taking any confidence level must take confidence level to justify his findings. Since he cannot be perfect, he must say to what degree that he is confident about what he is working at. Then probability analysis must also be produced so that the p-value can enable specification of margin of error and other errors, like errors type 1 and 2 will be taken care of. So generally, researchers and students are therefore encouraged to proceed to inferential statistics unless it is impracticable to do so. Selection of inferential statistical tests. There are many statistical tests from where you can make a choice, and the basic type of statistical test inferential and their uses can be found in the link provided. Now in that link you will find under the type of test column you will find PIC correlation, Spearman's correlation, chi-square, peer t-test, independent t-test, ANOVA, and a whole lot of others, simple regression, multiple regression. So you can take a look at how these tests are used, or their uses. For instance, parametric correlation, you can test for the strength of the association between two continuous variables. So you'll be able to know when and how to apply these tests. But beyond that, what is important is that the basic type of statistical tests and their uses will also be dependent on the kind of data you have, because the kind of data determines the kind of statistical test or analysis that you can do. That's a basic principle. In your choice of statistical test, you must examine the kind of data that you have before you can know the kind of statistical test you need to apply, and also your objectives. The statistical test you are going to apply must align with your objectives, and it will also be largely dependent on the kind of data you have. Statistical tests can be parametric or non-parametric, and the basic difference is that if your data is if you have a data distribution that is normal, you are likely to use the parametric test, and if it's non-normal, then you use non-parametric test. Then again, what guides you again is in the data format that I mentioned is whether your data is quantitative or qualitative. If it's quantitative, you are amenable to using parametric, and if it's qualitative, then you use non-parametric. So you have to examine all those factors together before you can make a decision whether you are going to use a parametric test or non-parametric test. So now again, stressing that, if you have to stress that again, then it means that you should definitely choose a parametric test if you are sure that your data is sampled from a population that follows a normal distribution, as I said before, at least approximately. Then your sample size must be greater than 32 with randomized selection. So please note that you can only use a parametric test if you are sure that your data has a normal distribution, at least approximately, and your sample data is greater than 32, and you have randomized the selection. You should definitely use a non-parametric test in this situation. When your data is ranked, when you have a ranked data, that's like qualitative because you resort to ranking. Then where your sample is less than 32, you are advised to use non-parametric tests. Where your data format is non-numeric, that's qualitative, as I said before. And where many values are missing, too high or too low to measure, then you will have to use parametric tests. So please take a look at the link again, and you see the kind of tests that are available for use and what they are actually set out to do. So you must consider your objectives as well. So the outcome of the test, whether parametric or non-parametric, must provide answers, predictive answers to your research questions.
Perhaps what I would like to add to this is that all the statistical tests have their assumptions. They have their assumptions for their use. So researchers should be very careful or investigative to look at these assumptions and see whether their data have met the assumption or their data format have met their assumption before they start using the statistical tests. Thank you.